Hello, everyone, and welcome to PR Explored, the video podcast where we delve into trends and topics related to public relations. I'm your host, Michelle Garrett, a PR consultant, author, and writer. And today I have with me my guest, Fred Cook. Fred is the director of the Annenberg Center for Public Relations at USC, and he's also the chair emeritus of Golan. Hi, Fred. How are you?
Hi, Michelle. I'm fine. How are you doing?
Good. I'm so happy
Good.
to have you back again.
And I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, we're going to dig into this report that the USC Annenberg does every year. But before we do that, let's hear a little bit about your background and what you've been up to and anything you want to share with us.
Well, how much time do you have? I've been doing this for a long time. I'm in my 10th year at USC, and we've issued this report every year on a different topic. So that's exciting. It just came out a few weeks ago. And it's about, well, I'll talk more about that later. Golan is doing great. We were just part of the merger we're part of Interpublic, and we're bought by Omnicom. So that's been a big change in everyone's lives. We're adapting to that new world. And I'm not as involved in the agency as I once was, but I'm still very much part of the management team, and they're all my friends because I worked with them for so long. But the PR business I think is doing well. There's a lot of things happening right now in the business that I think everybody who's working in it knows about. Everything from AI to hybrid to polarization to all the changes in the media and the changes in the agency world and the mergers and acquisitions, and it's a lot of stuff going on right now. So it's a really interesting time to be studying PR. And we just had graduation, and we have a fantastic graduation class. Lindsey Vaughn was our speaker at Annenberg.
Oh my
And we saw a great group of PR people going out into the world. Many of them have jobs. It's a tough market right now, but a lot of them have jobs or internships, and I think they're going to do really well.
That's very encouraging. And that's Lindsey Vaughn would be a great speaker. I did see a note about that.
And then PR Week voted USC as the #1 PR program in this country this year. Again, that's twice in 3 years. So that was very exciting. And a bunch of our students went to the PR Week Awards in New York to accept it. And they had a wonderful time. They sat at different tables with different agencies and companies who were involved with USC, and they had a great time.
Oh, that's an amazing opportunity for the students. I mean, I'm sure.
And one of them, Sophie Shaked, was named PR Student of the Year also.
Oh.
So that was even a double whammy.
Wow. That's I mean, students don't always get opportunities like that.
No.
So I hope I'm sure they appreciate it because
they had a good time, and they enjoyed every minute of it, I think.
Good networking too.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, well, that's great. So I mean, this all sounds good, right? So
it's all good.
There's nothing, we don't have to worry about anything. And I'm kidding. So we're going to talk today about the 2026 Global Communication Report. It's entitled A Quiet Shift, and it examines how political and social polarization is reshaping the communications profession. So I would love if people are listening, watching, have questions, please post those and we'll do our best to answer them. But I'm just going to kind of dig in with some of my questions because every year you mentioned, it's a different topic, and I would love to hear, about how you decided how to frame it. And, this year, just talk a little bit about the background maybe.
Well, last year we did a report called Minding the Gap, which looked at PR, the major issues in PR from a generational point of view. We looked at hybrid, we looked at AI, we looked at media changes, and we looked at polarization. And pretty much everyone thought polarization was the biggest problem of all of those four. So we thought we'd delve a little bit deeper into it, because what we've seen is in the past year or year and a half, there has been a dramatic shift in the way public communications is being handled from a corporate perspective. We call it a quiet shift because that shift has been more to saying less particularly about issues like sustainability and purpose and DE&I. So there's been a big change, but nobody's really talking about it. So we wanted to sort of see if we could get to the bottom of it and find out what impact polarization is having, both short-term and long-term, in on the PR, the world of PR, and the people that are practicing it.
Yeah. I remember last year's survey was really interesting because obviously, I've been doing this a while too, so I'm always curious to know what how those newer to the profession are viewing it in light of all of these things that are going on. And I think this is, I thought the report was really interesting, but also I wasn't super surprised by it because,
Yeah.
when you're practicing, you see, some of these things. So, yeah. So after you did the research and kind of were sifting through the results, what were the biggest takeaways that you saw?
Well, probably one of the biggest was that and this was a survey of about 800 PR people, all ages, all over the world, agency and in-house. So we were talking to the industry itself. And the industry, not surprisingly, is very concerned about polarization. They think it's bad for the country. They think it's bad for mental health. They think that it's probably going to be around for quite some time. So there was a lot of, almost 90% felt that way about all those three topics. But contrary to that, over 90% thought it was also good for the PR industry, which is a big change. So what's bad for the U.S. and bad for the population is actually good for public relations. And that wasn't a giant surprise, but it was really, the numbers were staggering in that regard. And I think it just shows that polarization in a time where everyone is so sensitive about what they say and do because of the possible repercussions, that the counsel of smart PR people is more valuable than ever before. So I think that's the one silver lining to this dark cloud of polarization, is that it makes PR more valuable inside the organization. So that was an important finding, I thought.
Yeah, and I think just to dig into that a little bit further, I think it's really hard as somebody who's working in the profession to balance those two things because, personally, it probably impacts us in a very negative way. You were mentioning mental health and so forth, but then work-wise, it's, maybe it's
different story. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Then that's really hard to grapple with for me sometimes.
Yeah. Well, we deal with it both on a personal level and on a business level, and sometimes our feelings about it aren't in sync with one another from a business and personal perspective. So that can make the job even more challenging.
Yeah, yeah. So, what do students think about this? I mean, do you have any thoughts or insight into how do they view that?
Well, we looked at it from a generational point of view on a number of topics. And it's interesting that the students are nearly as sensitized to polarization as the older PR professionals. Their numbers were down in the 60 range versus the 90 range. So they're not as aware of it or not as concerned about it as older people. And I think that's probably because they've grown up in a polarized environment. So they don't know really anything different than that. And they've seen it and they're living with it full time. So that was sort of interesting. And we also saw that the general public wasn't as concerned about it or didn't think it was as bad as PR people. So clearly the older PR people are much more sensitized to polarization than anyone else. And it may cause them to be a little overly cautious, in fact, in terms of the decisions they're making, because nobody else seems to think it's quite as bad as they do.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
They don't know anything different. If they just, this has been kind of the when they've come of age, this has been the way things have been. So that's fascinating, actually, because we probably feel it a lot more than they maybe do.
I mean, most of my students were, when Obama was president, when they were 5 years old. It's when he was elected. So it's a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, the past 10 years has been huge. So let's talk about the stakeholders because the government has taken over employees and customers as the number one stakeholder communicators are watching.
Yeah.
And I mean, we know why, but that's certainly a shift to make
Yeah.
note.
Yes, it's definitely a shift, and I think that it's not that employees and customers aren't important. They're just not as important right now as the government and the federal officials and the regulators, because they seem to be calling the shots on a lot of things. So where we saw in the past activism was driven largely by employees and then by consumers in terms of doing purposeful things or changing, addressing some of the societal issues that are important to those two groups. Now that has become less important from a corporate perspective because the importance of government and the regulations and the politicians has become so paramount that's what the biggest concern. And it's shifting the nature of PR into a more defensive mode to sort of protect the brand as opposed to one that's going out and telling stories about all the great things the brand is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just something I don't think I've ever seen. I don't remember quite as much as, the last little bit here. So it's interesting.
Yeah, we're seeing a big change. I think in the report we talk about how different it was in Minnesota when George Floyd was killed versus the two murders that took place last year. In terms of the corporate outcry around George Floyd was massive. All over the country, companies were making statements in support of DEI and condemning the murder of George Floyd. And then in Minneapolis, 5 miles away from the same spot, 2 people were murdered by ICE, and the outcry was very muted. A handful of companies that were based in Minnesota put out a statement, but it's a very mild statement by comparison. So you can see the difference in just a matter of years of how the pendulum has shifted from one side to the other.
Yeah, and I imagine it could shift back just as quickly at some point.
That's the biggest question. We really don't know. I think that we don't know which is the anomaly I think a lot of people in public relations think 5 years ago we shifted too far to one way where everybody was speaking out about every single topic.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've shifted to the extreme in the other direction where nobody's talking about anything. So I think that there may be some middle ground between those two that's more appropriate. But it remains to be seen whether the pendulum's going to swing back that way and when it does, because we think polarization is going to be around for a long time.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in that because I did feel like it was quite a bit different, and I felt like I didn't think it was going to swing back quite so far the other way. So yeah, maybe there's a happy medium in there because I still see companies like Costco, for example, getting a lot of support, and they're kind of standing up to some of these issues like DEI and things. So I don't know. It's interesting because I know that there's always fear of losing some of your audience, but then of course you can gain audience too. So we see that with Nike, of course, and a lot of other brands. But one of the statistics that I saw was support for corporate advocacy has dropped 38% since 2023, which is pretty significant.
Huge drop. That was probably the most dramatic statistic in the report. And it dropped last year too. So the last 2 years have been way below what we saw the years before in terms of the number of people that think corporations should be addressing the issues, these societal type of issues, and have purpose-oriented programs. But that number has dropped. It's still above half of PR people believe that, but it's way below what it was a couple of years ago. And that's just reflective of the times that we're in. People are very cautious about we had a question 5 years ago about which organizations you would be willing to partner with on a communications program, and the number of people that said none of the above doubled since 5 years ago. So there's more scrutiny about who you get involved with. There's much more cautiousness about the topics you talk about, and a lot more reticence to put the CEO out there unless it's a very business-oriented subject matter. So people are playing it pretty safe these days.
That's my next question is about the C-suite because some corporations and C-suite executives are choosing to stay silent, and of
Yeah.
course, they're probably being counseled to do that. Although I will say, on the other hand, we see them out there sometimes just kind of shooting from the hip and kind of putting their foot in their mouth sometimes. So
I think what's happening. This isn't a question that we asked because I didn't think we would get the honest answers. But I think that a number of CEOs are actually happy that their companies don't have to speak out about some of these topics that are controversial. I think they feel like that was a very touchy subject for them to address, and they weren't really comfortable with it. So I think they've sort of washed their hands of this and are quite relieved that they don't have to talk about some of these subjects that they felt were outside of the course of their responsibility and their job and their company's role. So I think there's some sense of relief there, and I don't think those people are going to be reticent to start doing that again anytime soon.
yeah, silence is a strategy. That was something the report was talking about.
Yeah.
Sometimes staying quiet is the best approach, according to 41% of those who responded to the survey, and among in-house communicators, 52% said that. So that's still pretty divided.
It
it's
is.
interesting.
I think we asked people whether they thought a good defense was the best offense or good offense is the best defense. And there was a little more on the offensive side than defense, but there was certainly a mixed view on that topic. And I think that people still feel that being on the offense, being on the front foot is better than just waiting to see what happens. But if you look at what's really happening, we have some charts in there from Meltwater and Cometrics that talk about corporate messaging 6 months before Trump was elected and 6 months after. And the numbers are staggering in terms of how quiet people have become on a whole bunch of different topics. They've just quit talking about them. And they're talking about other things that are less controversial, like AI and more business-related issues. So I think although people still believe offense is a good approach, everybody's playing defense right now, almost everyone.
Really interesting. And there was a quote that I thought was interesting. It says, controversy doesn't lead to revenue.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, but then again, like I said, I feel like some companies like Costco have kind of maybe bucked that trend a little bit. So I don't know. I still say what works for you. You have to figure out your audience and what works for you.
Yeah.
So
there are certain brands. I think there are certain brands that are going to come probably this year and next are going to begin to be more proactive than they have been. I think that's just part of their nature, and that's what their customers expect and their employees expect. But I think it's going to be just a handful, and it'll probably be the ones that you are talking about that have done it in the past that aren't as afraid of the repercussions of speaking out. But right now, there's not much being said except for a handful of people. But Anthropic is a good example. They went up against the government in terms of how their AI products are being used, and their sales skyrocketed because of that. So I think there's still that opportunity to appeal to a certain audience who's looking for that activism, and we'll support that with their checkbook.
Yeah. Well, we know that things can change sometimes pretty quickly, so we'll just have to see what happens. Let's see what question. We are on question 5. Let's see. So priorities are shifting regarding how resources are being allocated. We see more, according to the survey, more resources shifting toward crisis communications and government relations. And of course, as we've discussed, DEI, sustainability, and purpose-driven initiatives, the resources are declining.
Yes, that's true. And I think people are probably not surprised by that. But you have to look at what is the ramifications of that for PR, because a lot of the communications over the past 5 or 6 years has been about DE&I, sustainability, and purpose-driven initiative. So if that is part of our purview has been taken off the table, what's going to replace it? Is it going to be more government relations, or is it going to be more business-oriented stories, or what happens to that work? And that's where I became concerned. I thought if we're not playing as big of a role in corporate storytelling as we have been in the past, does that in any way diminish our importance as a function inside a corporation or as an agency if a lot of this work is not happening anymore? It turns out the companies are not communicating less, they're just communicating differently. But I do think that if this silence stays around for the next 4 or 5 years, it's going to have some interesting ramifications for the importance or the future of the PR function could be changed by all that, by that shift. And we don't know yet whether that's going to happen, but we'll wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the need for, storytelling and being human and just, I think it's that the C-suite kind of needs more from PR and comms pros, and maybe they're kind of seeing that. But yeah, it's interesting because I think even if you're not speaking out publicly, you're still discussing internally how you're going to approach and manage your comms. So,
but you may not need the same people. You may not need as many people, but there's certainly a different skill set, especially for students coming out of college or master's programs like USC. There's a different requirement for them to better understand politics, public policy, to better understand the financials because becomes more business driven, and better understand crisis and crisis management because there's such an issues-oriented approach to all of these things. And we're defending the company rather than out promoting their products and promoting their initiatives. We're defending them, and that's a whole different skill set for PR people.
Yeah, and I of course, this is not new, but one misstep can kind of get you in trouble because it goes viral on social media, and then it's like so. I feel like that's not new, but that's certainly still in play because again, we see CEOs just kind of getting caught off guard with a question or making a misstatement, misstep, and then they kind of have to recover, but it usually blows over. So that's another that's another thing because there's just so much going on all the time. I think that's something that would be a challenge for those coming into the profession, but of course they're probably used to that. So,
well, I think that's when you're silent. I think that's your hope that it's going to blow over, that people are going to forget about it, and you can just be quiet for a few days and it'll go away. And sometimes that'll work, but I think longer term, I don't think that's a sustainable strategy long term to just say we're not going to say anything about anything and hope nobody notices.
Yeah, I do see that. And in fact, I've seen some things, written about that too. And that's just, I mean, to me, that's a little bit incredible because it's like, it used to be, we want to get in front of this. We have to, get right on top of it. And of course, with social media, we don't have a day to discuss it. We kind of have to get in there and have our core team come up with something right away. So to think that you're just going to sit and not say anything is funny to me. But I mean, I know people do it.
Yeah.
So what about communication departments? We kind of started to get into this a little bit. They may be restructured. So more than 2/3 of in-house communicators believe their organizations are likely to restructure, according to the survey.
Yeah, that was a big number. I thought that almost 2/3 said they're going to restructure over the next 5 years. But it just shows that public relations and communications functions are very flexible and that we always have to adapt to what's happening in the real world. So I think that restructuring around polarization, around AI, is probably bound to happen in most places over the coming years because our business is changing. The content is changing, the technology is changing, the media is changing. And if we don't adapt to that, we're going to be left behind. So I think it's probably good news that 2/3 are planning on restructuring because that shows that they recognize that change and they're proactively going to address it. So I think the more change, the more adaptable, more flexible we are, the more likely we are to survive and succeed, continue to succeed as we have in the past.
Well, I have heard, of course, I work for myself, so I'm not out there in the job market, thank goodness. But I've heard a lot of colleagues talking about this isn't new, for several years at least, job titles and responsibilities have kind of been all over the map. And of course, we have content marketing, we have social media, and I feel like there's a lot of overlap, and it's just confusing when people are trying to apply for a job so maybe the restructuring won't be a bad thing. I don't know.
No, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we've got to constantly be thinking about what's going to happen next and how we're going to be ready for that. And not only from an organizational structural point of view, but from a skill set point of view. That's why we're teaching a lot of AI classes at USC. Some universities are sort of shying away from it, thinking that it's not appropriate for a university setting. But we're trying to prepare students for a world where AI is going to be doing a lot of this work. And if they don't know they're not fluent in AI, they're going to have a hard time getting a job. So I think you've got to adjust in real time these days because it's just the changes are happening so fast. And understanding what's politically, I mean, you see every day there's some new political wrinkle or some new change in policy or some new approach to the elections or voting or everything. So you've really got to be on your toes, I think, to be effective in this work.
Yeah, I think thinking on your feet is, it's always been important, but I mean, the speed of things now, it's just, it's kind of incredible.
And you're going as faster than ever, and there's more danger out there. So you have to be cautious and fast at the same time. And that's not an easy combination to maintain.
Yeah, and that's where I think the experience comes in. And that's why I worry too about AI coming in, because of course, if we have AI doing lower level work in any profession, we're not preparing the younger, newer pros for the future, and they need experience to be able to really do a good job.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
That's interesting. We could talk about AI, but I didn't have that on our agenda for today. But yeah, I'm really curious because I feel like there has to be a balance if universities are gonna teach AI, and I know some are really embracing it and others are not. Um, the future outlook. I found this really interesting. I'm gonna put it in here. 7 in 10 PR pros say the outlook for future growth is positive.
Yeah. And that was a surprise to me. Not a surprise, really. I think when we set out to make this survey and we thought about polarization and the fact that so much of what we normally would talk about is not on the table anymore, that we're communicating about fewer topics, but and some of them are very important topics that I would have thought 10 years ago, if you told me I thought purpose was going to be the main trajectory for PR, that's what we were going to be talking about for the foreseeable future, about the good that companies were doing for their employees and for the society. But it's actually gone the other way, the other direction. So I thought that people might be concerned that that was making their jobs less valuable or less important, not only to them, but to the organizations they work for. So seeing that 3/4 of people were very optimistic about the future, I think was encouraging. So it doesn't seem that, 25% may be worried, but for most part, people are pretty upbeat about where PR is headed. So I think that's a good sign, but I think we have to be cautious about how we're approaching it, because if we're not adapting appropriately, I think we may find ourselves in a different position than we are today. But I use the word, I think, apocalyptimist is the word I use for the PR people. We are always willing to paint the worst case scenario about what's going to happen, but then we're very optimistic that we're going to survive it at the same time. So I think people that work in PR are apocalyptimists, and they're positive regardless of what's happening, and maybe that's a good thing. I think that we should have a good outlook on the future, and then make the most of it depending on what happens.
Well, yeah, I found that to be funny because it's 7 in 10 seemed high to me based on the other findings in the report, and just the general, because I feel like, and I don't know if you've noticed this too, but I know a lot of people who have been laid off and are kind of experiencing a lot of challenges in the in the business. So, yeah, I don't know. I found that really, I mean, I try to maintain hope no matter what, but
Yeah,
it's
I think PR people are positive about things, despite the circumstances that may lead you to believe otherwise.
yeah, yeah. And I think we are just coming back, and I thought this was just an interesting finding, was that, we PR becomes even more valuable in times of
Yeah,
disruption. So, I guess that's a good thing for us, but we just have to figure out how to, it's all about balance. It's
yes, and I
fast
think it,
and yeah.
and I think there's a quiet shift in communications, and there has to be an equal shift in terms of what PR people are good at. And I think that you're going to see in the future that PR is going to be more aligned with the business objectives of the company. A lot of people already are, but I think it's going to come closer and closer. We're going to have to be
Mhm,
more financially oriented, more profit driven, and show how PR is really impacting the business in a positive way, as opposed to just telling stories. Because I think that's we're going to find our value in that area much more than we are in storytelling, as we have in the past. And it
mhm,
means that students, as I said before, are going to have a different skill set. They're not always financially, their financial acumen is not always as sharp as their communication skills. So I
mhm,
think that's going to have to change, and they're going to have to understand what's happening in the world and the impact that a war in Iran is having on their companies and their products and their customers and that sort of thing. It's going to become super important. And understanding all this crazy politics is going to be really a part of the job, because every time you send out a message or an email or a press release or write a speech, you've got to take into consideration how that's going to react, how other people are going to react to that. And right now, half the country is reacting to one thing, and the other half the country is reacting another way. So you've got to calibrate that sort of a reputational calculus every time you do anything or say anything. You've got to take that into consideration.
do you think it's industry specific sometimes, though?
Well, it's probably. I think that B2B is probably a little safer place to be because they're not as as highly visible to the rest of the world. But
Mhm,
consumer brands out there are getting can get clobbered in any kind of situation if they make the wrong move. Not
mm.
only by the media, but the politicians, but also by their customers. If they do something that people don't feel is appropriate, you hear about it immediately. I mean, Bud Light was a good example of that. Their sales sank, I think, 30% for a period of time because of their marketing that they did. And I
Mhm.
think that scared a lot of brands a lot because they could see themselves that happening to them if they make the wrong step. So then it becomes easier not to communicate at all out of fear of saying something that's going to upset people.
I feel like, though, for every, Bud Light example, there's an example on the other side, like a Nike, like with Colin Kaepernick and all of that. So I feel like it could go either way, but it is a risk. And back to the quote about, um, it's not, controversy doesn't lead to revenue. So I
Yeah.
feel like that's really, just very telling. So,
There's a number of quotes in the report, and we interviewed 20 CCOs of major companies in the U.S., and we extracted some quotes. They're anonymous, but they do support a lot of the data that we've heard. And a lot of the people are just saying, just smart for the business to be careful right now, and that they don't want to have any controversy on their watch if possible. So they're just being really careful, and they're vetting things further. They're checking, double checking everything before they send it out. They're doing more message testing. They're vetting their partnerships with influencers much more closely to make sure they have the right ones. They're talking to only the media that they trust about topics they don't think are controversial. So there's a lot of things that companies are doing now to ensure that they don't create some kind of shoot themselves in the foot, so to speak. But they're being very cautious and maybe sometimes too cautious in that regard and missing some opportunities perhaps to tell the story a little bit better.
yeah. Well, you don't want to stir up a hornet's nest,
No, no, everybody's afraid of the hornet's going to sting them.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a risk. So yeah, and it seems, I don't know, it's always interesting to work in this field, but wow, there's just a lot,
Yeah,
to
there's a lot to
get
take in these days.
your arms around and, keep up with. So, um Is there anything else you want to share before we close this out today?
Well, I think we've covered it all. I think that we'll see what happens over the course of the next couple of years. You don't know. It's hard to predict the future when you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I think if nothing else, we're living in very interesting times. It's very stressful times, but very interesting. And I think PR is going to survive this, and we're going to remain essential, but we're going to have to adapt in a lot of different ways, I think, in order to do so. So again, we're just continuing to evolve as the world changes.
Yes, and we are really good at that. So
Yeah, apocalyptimist.
I like that.
Yeah, it's
I
good.
like that term. Well, I really appreciate your time, Fred, and I think this research is always fascinating. And I want to thank you for being here and
My
sharing all
pleasure.
of this. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Fight on.
Bye.
Bye.